Our story starts with Moses, and Moses seems to be doing all right. This is not a guy who seemed to be in a lot of need for career advice or a big shift in how he was moving forward. No, he's married. His relationship with his wife and his father-in-law seems to be pretty good. The sheep were plentiful, the horizon full of possibility. And there he was, minding his own business, tending his sheep, and he saw something that made him stop and pay attention. He was curious, and he sees a burning but not a consuming fire. A bush ablaze in a way that he hadn't seen anything like this before. And our text, I don't know if you noticed it, but our text makes sure we know when this happens, and because it's a big deal. And so we hear the play-by-play of what happens. So here are the words again from our scripture. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." And then there are some more stage directions that say, "And when the Lord saw that Moses had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, 'Moses, Moses,' and he said, 'Here I am.'" Famous, right? And the next words out of Moses' mouth are, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Moses cannot believe he's been asked to do this terribly difficult task. God calls him away from his comforts and his stability. God calls him towards facing his history and his past. God calls him to let go of his current trajectory, his current relative peace. God calls him towards a new thing, for him, for the Israelites, and for the Egyptians. God calls him to work to liberate a community that he had never acknowledged as his own. God calls him to put others' well-being ahead of his own. And God calls him to change his understanding of himself and his labor. Serves him right for being curious. And when we're thinking about labor and what it is he's up to, it's gonna be not working. All right, hold on one sec. There it is. Okay. And when we think about labor, we know that it is Labor Day. And we recognize that as a country, and you may know that I rarely try to make our religious time, our worship time, about civic or cultural holidays. But labor has so many religious and ethical and moral components. And in our world today, we continue to call people to important work. God continues to call, and we as communities call people to things like nursing and teaching and the arts and preparing food. And these people feel called when they say yes to that. And yet many of those people who are in those professions are on strike or have struck or about to strike because their labor is not respected. And in our country, or in our county, there's even a movement to make sure farm workers have appropriate access to bathrooms and to hazard pay when there are wildfires. There are some labor issues that are very serious. I suspect God is calling some of us towards. And so, on Labor Day, let's talk a little bit about labor. In this particular scripture, it's kind of obvious. God is calling Moses to liberate the Israelites from the bondage of slavery. And God is calling Moses to liberate the Egyptians from the bondage of being oppressors. And what is Moses' labor? How will he use his time and his energy, as well as concerns over taking care of each other? All of that are brought into this call story. God invites Moses into God work that embodies liberation, demands justice, and creates change and newness where there was only death and fear. God's love is fierce. God's love creates paths. And God calls Moses into doing this labor of love with God. Now, most of us are probably not called to be the leader of a large movement, but we are all called to be part of working towards God's liberation for all people. And many of us, most of us, I'd like to say all of us, have done and continue to do good God work at home and at work and right here in our community. And I had initially wanted to invite 3 of you to speak on your labor and how it relates to your faith on this day. And if that sparks interest to you, please let me know, because we're going to do it on next Labor Day, if not before. But as I was talking about this with Bill in the office as we do our worship planning, we got very excited to talk about labor, and Bill got very excited to talk about his labor as our music director. So Bill, will you tell us about your labor?
I feel very fortunate. My labor in life is something that I love doing, making music in many different forms. I am so thankful that I was given the gift of music in my life. Specifically, my labor here is to make music for God, our church, and our community. Music that inspires, that transforms, that lifts us all up. And for me, music that is also relevant to the world we live in today, something that speaks to the moment we are in right now. Social justice for all, taking care of our planet, music that creates a space that welcomes everybody. Musical language for God, it evolves over time just as our language for God shifts. This brought me to the question of what is the purpose of music and worship? Well, I believe that it brings us closer to God, it enriches our scriptures, it transcends physical, and it helps us connect to the Spirit. I realize that everyone connects differently to music in the church. Some connect to the classic songs, some connect to contemporary songs. And I feel like we are accepting and do a wonderful job of mixing these together and singing all the new and the old. So this is why I also seek out new music that inspires us today, new music with lyrics that transform us in the now. And there is so much new, wonderful music being written every day. And when I hear new pieces that inspire and move me, I bring them here. And it's important to me that we stay in touch with all of this and how the Spirit is moving us as a community. I always believe in looking forward. And so that is my labor here at First Congregational. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, I appreciate the way you've shared today and the way that you lead us. When Moses said, "Who am I to do this really hard work?" I wonder if you remember from our scripture what God says. Oh, y'all were paying attention. I will be with you. Say it louder. I will be with you. Yeah. I will be with you just as I was with the people before you, all of the ancestors. It's a continuation, and it's beautiful to know that we are a part of something that has been and is now and will be. Moses, as we know him in our story, is yet to be. We celebrate in this passage that Moses is at the beginning of his relationship with God, but in this passage, we don't know, and God doesn't know how it's all going to wind up. Moses responds to a yes. I'll do this work with you. The rest is up to God. And given that we actually do know the rest of the story, we know that God shows up for Moses, right? And for the people. And the same is true today. God calls us to seek liberation and justice for all. And we are lucky because we trust that the creator of the universe is on the side of justice and the side of human dignity in labor. God doesn't just call us to do this work by ourselves. And that is the very best of news. That is the good news. We do not walk this road alone, but trust that as we make choices, as we put our labor towards good use, God will use that, for God is with us. For as our song said earlier, your labor is not in vain, for God is with us. Thanks be to God.